Hey everyone, this is the third clip in my series of post-processing tutorial clips. In this episode I'm going to be editing a photo submitted by tresflip on YouTube. He actually submitted these photos from the Mt Fuji area, and he explains that there's a lot of spray from the waterfall to deal with some crazy lighting conditions. They're two really nice photos and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you and also having a crack at editing them. So let's get started. This is the photos he's submitted. This one and this one. Personally, I think the colours are really out and they're slightly too warm, so that'll probably be the first thing that I'll adjust in both images, and then we'll go from there. So let's get started with this one. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, I'm going to use the colour temperatures adjustment tool to find the white point of the image. This will probably make the image appear a lot colder. Yeah, it has. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is slightly change the exposure just to bring out the foliage area around the water. Okay, I'm just being careful here as I don't want to bump it up too much and make the water just appear overly white. I still want to retain some greyness to it just to give it detail. You might be wondering what the red is up the top. That's just from using this tool, which allows me to know when the highlights start clipping. I'm just going to disable this for the time being. And I've also got this enabled for shadows. I'll disable this too. Okay. So now I'm quite happy with how the image is looking. I'm going to use the adjustment brush to paint over the foliage areas to make some more closer adjustments to this. So I select the adjustment brush, and now I paint over the area. I probably will paint over the water too, but not the actual stream of the waterfall. Okay, so I'll just check where I've actually painted to make sure I haven't missed any bits. Perfect. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to bump the exposure up a little bit more and add a bit of contrast and shadows. And here I'm going to adjust the temperature a little bit too. And play with the saturation. And the tint. And also bump the sharpness up a bit. Cool. While I'm at it, I'm just going to quickly straighten it, as I think it's just off by a tiny amount. Okay, now I'm going to adjust the hue of the greens a bit. This is one of the difficult things when you are editing someone else's photo, because I wasn't actually there to see what colour greens were actually surrounding the waterfall that day. They could be more of a yellow tone, but I'm just going to assume they're more of a nice green, but this might be incorrect. And I'm just going to play with the saturation of this a bit. Cool. And now play with the saturation of the rocks around the waterfall a bit. What I've done here, I've just gradually lowered the yellow a little. I'm quite happy with that. Oops. Now I'm going to play with the camera calibration a little. So first I'm going to start with the green primary. Now I'm going to open up the adjustment brush again, and now I want to paint around the bottom of the waterfall a bit to bring this out a bit because it's a little bit dull. Cool. I'm just bumping up the exposure. It looks like I've accidentally painted over the rocks a bit, so I'm just going to grab the eraser brush and paint over that part of the image that I've accidentally included. That's better. And now I can select that brush again that I created. And I'll play with saturation and give it a bit of a boost. Perfect. Now the highlights a bit. That's better. Okay, so now I'm actually going to do some changes over the waterfall water itself. I might slightly just adjust the exposure of this just to make it a little bit more detail in certain parts, but it's more trial and error, so I'm not actually sure how this will come out. So I'll play with the highlights. That's better. As you can see, you can actually see some more detail of where the water changes as it cascades down. Before it was more of a sea of white, which is okay, but I prefer just getting little bits of detail. Okay, now I'm just going to play with the foliage area at the top part of the image a bit to see if I can bring that out a bit more. And just gradually bring up the exposure. No, just ever so slightly I think on this one, and we'll just play with the contrast a little too. And the shadows. Cool. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with that, and now I might export it to Photoshop to make some further changes. But just before I do, I'm just going to show you before and after of the process we've made. So as you can see, the image is already looking a lot different. There's a couple of little things I wouldn't mind doing in Photoshop, so I'm going to export that now, and we'll see how we go. Slowly exporting. Cool. Okay, now for my next trick. This is something I've actually posted a tutorial on, and it's a useful little trick. What it's called is we adjust the black and white point to the image, and to do this we create a threshold layer, like so. And now we grab the color sampler tool. Okay, first we're going to find the white point of the image. The shadows rather. So we take it to the left first, and then we gradually bring it back until shadows start to appear. I'm quite happy with that, so I select it, and that gives me the black point. So now I drag it to the opposite end of the scale and gradually bring it back until I find the white point. And now I select the white point of the image, and now I can delete the threshold layer. Now we can create a curves layer and manually set the black and white points. To do this, we first select the black sampler tool and select the bit that we defined in the threshold. And now we do the same with the highlights. Cool. So just to give you a before and after of what that's actually done to the photo. Perfect. I'm actually really happy with that. Sometimes it doesn't work, but it's a useful tool to have up your sleeve just as a bit of an experiment. It doesn't necessarily always work, but personally I like to just do it just in case. It might not work on the next image that I edit, but at least we try anyway. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that, but I might just do a tiny bit of dodging before we're finished. So I could create a duplicate layer. I like to do this so I can actually do it before and after to see if the changes I've made are actually worth it. So select OK, and now select the dodge tool. So I just want to gradually paint over this area. I'm going to drop the exposure quite a lot, as I only want the changes to be tiny. So here we go. That's just how I want it. Just a little bit of a brightness around the waterfall without going overboard. I might actually just bring out this rock area too a little. Perfect. And now I can flatten the image and I'm done. So I'm just going to save this and I'll send it back to David. And now I'm going to edit the other photo that he sent through. I actually probably prefer the other one that he sent through. It's got a lot going for it, and I actually really like the composition that he's used for the photo. Hopefully it edits up well. Cool. As before, we're going to adjust the temperature first by selecting the widest point of the image that we can see. Generally when you're shooting waterfalls, obviously water's going to be the widest point, unless you've blown out the sky, which is also quite good, but in this there's no sky to use as a sample. So I'm just going to select around here. Perfect. Look at the change already. It's massively lost the colour cast, and it's brought it back to some recognisable colours that look a lot more natural. So now I'm ready to bump up the exposure a bit. Cool. There's a big difference in the image. I can see that this bit's a lot more exposed than this part of the image. This is a bit more underexposed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an adjustment brush and paint over this part of the image just to bring it out slightly. I'm not going to go overboard though. So I'm just leaving this bit here alone, as I don't want to bring that out as much. And I'll leave the water as I'll edit this after. And we'll just bump the highlights up a bit, and maybe play with the shadows to give it a bit more of contrast. Actually, I'm just going to play with the temperature a little bit too, slightly warming it a little. Cool. Now I'm just going to play with the white and black points of the overall image. Excellent. I really like this foliage area around the waterfall, and I want to bring this out a bit more, so I'm going to create a small size adjustment brush and paint over the area. I might just bring this area out too. adjust the saturation. Perfect. What I'm trying to do here is I'm kind of making this the centerpiece of the photo, so the audience instantly focuses on this part of the image and then gradually look at the rest. Okay, now I'm going to make an adjustment to the tint. I'm just going to gradually play here and see if I get the result I'm happy with. Perfect. Now I'm going to paint over the water part of the bottom of the image. And adjust the saturation also. And play with the highlights and the shadows and contrast. Perfect. Now I'm going to use the tone curve as I just want to make some tiny adjustments and add an S curve. It's only a very gradual curve that I've added, but it's created a little bit more contrast to the image and brought out the highlights ever so slightly. Now I just want to go back to these highlights a bit and see if I can bring them out a bit more. So I'm going to select the adjustment brush that I used before and just gradually bring it up the contrast. And high exposure, sorry. Excellent. And now I'm going to play with the camera calibration. Did it again. The green primary first. So I'm going to gradually change the hue just to see what result it gets. And also the saturation. And the blue primary. Excellent. Now I'm ready to export it to Photoshop like before. So just bear with me while this exports. Oh, sorry, just before we do that, I'll just show you before and after of the progress we've made so far. Once again, just by using the temperature tool changes the images a lot. I'm really happy with how this is actually coming along. And I think I can make some slight changes in Photoshop by just a bit more selective dodging and burning, and I'll also use the white balance tool again to see what result I get. So let's try this again. So first I'm going to create a threshold layer before. I'm just going to skim through this a bit as we covered it last time in a bit more detail. And you can also have a look at my other tutorial clip which actually goes into it in a lot more detail. So let's go. going to delete the color sampling bits. Oh, they're gone. Good. Okay. Look, I don't mind what that's done. It's definitely made it a lot more contrasty, but I don't want it to be that strong. So I'm going to keep the changes, but gradually lower the opacity a bit just to reduce the impact. That's better. So just a before and after. Perfect. So once again, I'm going to do a duplicate layer while I dodge and burn. And first I'm going to dodge over the highlights part of some parts of the waterfall. I'm going to use about a 20% exposure on this brush. Probably gone a bit overboard in some parts of the image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an adjustment layer and use the paintbrush with the black selected. This will allow me to gradually bring back areas that I don't want to use that dodging. So down here I've overdone it a bit, so I'm just going to paint over that area. And parts of this waterfall have been overdone a bit now, so I'm just going to gradually paint over that too. So just before and after of the changes. Cool. Now I'm just going to paint over the foliage area a bit too. I'll just keep this layer to do this. I'm just going to change it to the midtones rather than highlights. Now I'm just going to paint over the water a bit. Perfect. So just to give you a before and after. And I'm happy with how that is, so I'm going to save the image and also send this to David. So just to summarise, these are the two final images. Oops. We'll just open Lightroom to compare. If it ever decides to open. Sorry. Okay. So this is what we had to work with, and then we went to this phase, and then after a bit of editing in Photoshop just to bump up the highlights and midtones and parts of the image, this was the final product. I'd obviously resize this and do some selective sharpening to the image, but I covered this in another tutorial, and you probably aren't overly interested in the process. This is pretty simple anyway, but it's mostly just using the unsharpened mask to bring out detail in the image. And just a before and after on the other image. Sorry. And once again, the colour temperature of this one was pretty off, so I adjusted that first. And then we made our way to Photoshop, and this was the resulting image. So before and after. Once again, I'd most likely export this in Photoshop with some sharpening applied before I post it on the web. If I was to sharpen it, I'd just edit probably around the foliage area around the image, as I wouldn't want to sharpen the water itself, as I'd like to keep this nice and dreamy like, and also almost like just not bring out the detail of the water, as I prefer this just to be dull. Anyway guys, thanks very much for watching. If you're interested in submitting your photos like David is for me to have an edit, I'd be more than happy to have a go. Use the contact form on my website, as I prefer not to write my email address on YouTube, because no doubt I'll get a lot of spam unfortunately, but my blog is alexwisephotography.net/blog, and then there's a contact page up the top. Just locate my email from there and fire through pictures. I prefer RAWs, as I don't like to edit JPEGs myself, as I don't think you can bring back as much detail if the image has actually been lost, in terms of like losing highlights and shadows and whatnot. And personally, I just like the more control you have over the image by using a RAW. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. See ya.